Welcome to the Ninja Babes podcast. I'm excited today to be here with Nardeen Faragala. Welcome. How's it
Thank
going?
you. Good.
I'm excited to have you
Excited to
on.
be here.
You're
I'm
the
excited to be here.
you're the first of your kind on this show because what I mean by that is on the Ninja Babes podcast we talk tons about like sports performance and training and we interview athletes and all this stuff and it's very like focused on the activity and what we're doing, but we don't so much focus on the behind the scenes, like what are we eating, how are we sleeping, like what's going on inside. And that is where you come in. So I'll kind of give you a more of an introduction than that, but for all of our viewers, we're talking about what's happening on the inside today. So,
Yes.
Nardeen, you lived in Canada for 16 years and actually served in the Canadian military for 4 years, which I found very fascinating. But you're passionate about health and wellness and seeing people's lives change for the better and seeing ninja warriors' lives change for the better. So, we're excited to have you on. You're a certified health coach from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and you love coaching through lifestyle modification, especially in the areas of nutrition, sleep, stress management, mood regulation, and exercise. So today we have a fun topic too, a topic that we've never talked about on the podcast, which is doubly exciting. So we're talking about periods, talking about
Yes.
the menstrual
Yes, we are.
cycle, and for good reason. I think that so often girls or women, anyone, any female out there, sometimes we just get this negative connotation about your period. Or
hmm
you're just like, it's happening, like, and it can just be surrounded by all of this negativity, and sometimes in a way for good reason. Like if you're hurting, if you're just in pain, if you're having headaches and like all these bad symptoms that come along with it, it's nothing to look forward to. But at the same time, there actually is something so beautiful and wonderful about the fact that you do have a period and what it means. And as athletes, I think we've never really, to me at least, like there's so little that we talk about as far as how can you like take advantage of where you are in your cycle, or how can you understand your cycle in such a way that it like unlocks this like understanding of what's really going on throughout the whole month. And so we're gonna get all into all of that today, but I wanted to just say welcome.
Like just from this introduction, I'm so excited. Like, yes, let's talk about all that. It sounds so good.
Yes, it is so good. And I just again like I want to just right from the start, for anyone who's like, I don't even know if I want to listen to this right now. It's like there's, for me, personal story, when I was like high school into college, like early adulthood, my periods always gave me trouble. It was just like radical cravings, like a lot of pain and like cramping and just like all out. I'd have to go to sleep, but usually just for the first day, and then I was okay after that. But then
hmm
later on I started really changing the way that I I lived my life. Like I changed my diet a lot. I changed just kind of the way I took care of my body. And I always thought I was like healthy, but then I tried to really look into like, well, what am I eating is and how is it really affecting me? And so after that, I basically now for several years have not had painful periods at all. And that's such a switch. Like it's I still get those waves of like exhaustion, and that's
hmm
different, but it's not like pain. So there is light at the end of the tunnel for like all those listening who are like, no, periods just suck. Like it's not true. There's actually so much that we don't know and don't understand. And so Nardeen is going to enlighten us today.
Yes. So let's talk about why periods are awesome.
Yes.
So, I think that there is a lot in the sex education that we get is just like, well, you're just going to have to suffer through it. Like, this happens every month. And, like, too bad you're a woman, you know? And, like, no, like, reject that. So I think one of the things that I realized actually when I was working in the military and I was working with a lot of men is that our period actually gives us like this built-in mechanism that we're always getting feedback on the way that we're living and our lifestyle choices. And now obviously sometimes it takes longer, you know, because you can have a bad period and that can be reflecting decisions that you made like 2 months ago or 3 months ago. But it's always giving you feedback on how you're living your life. And actually there was I worked with someone in the military, this man who lived like the worst lifestyle possible. He was drinking Coke like all the time and pizza and like chicken nuggets and whatever. And I was so disgusted by it. And he was always like sticking it under my nose because at that point I wasn't eating sugar anymore. And he's like, see, you know, I'm not gaining weight. And he was definitely like the definition of skinny fat, like for sure. Um, but he like basically he just couldn't sleep. That was his only symptom of not being well. And for us, I think we just have a much more obvious sort of like, hey, if something goes off with your period, then you know that something's wrong. And I hope that by the end of this episode that you got like that people know that this is a great indicator of, okay, so I made a decision. What can I do to kind of change this for the better? So our periods are like just this, like it's just a feedback mechanism, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it that so many people don't realize. And I know I didn't realize until much later into my 20s that, yeah, it is this feedback mechanism, like you said, but it can tell you so much about what's happening inside your body that I just had no
Mhm.
idea. So,
Yeah, exactly. So and it gives us this, I mean, it's kind of a foreign concept a bit, but it allows us to have this sort of rhythm to life and honor the rhythms that exist in our body, you know, instead of trying to do the same thing every single day and just pretend like we feel the same every day, which we don't. Like even when you're not on your period, like we're going to talk about the different phases, and the way that I like to call it the hormone dance. The way the hormone dance works is that you are going to feel different in different phases of your cycle, and that's perfectly normal. And when you know that and you expect it, you can just kind of make, you know, take advantage of it, really. I mean, in the end, we're, especially as athletes, taking advantage of this is just, it's awesome. That's why periods are awesome. So another thing is that it gives us this great opportunity to be self-aware in our own body. So I know some women, and like some of my clients have come to me and they only know when they're on their periods, you know, like 1 day or 2 days a month. I one of a good friend of mine who is like has two teenage kids, you know, I happened to mention that I was ovulating that day, and she looked at me and she's like, what? I've now, like, I don't know when I'm ovulating. I'm like, how did you have two children and you don't know when you're ovulating, you know? So anyways, but it's just this, you can be aware and you can just be completely in your body, you know, and it's not an inconvenience, but it's just, this is where I'm at in the month, and this is now what I'm going to do because this is where I'm at, you know? So
mhm.
yeah, I think it's really great.
Yeah, and I know we'll get more in depth in this soon here on the episode, but I think especially for like our ninja babes listening, like this is why it's so awesome is if you have a better understanding of where you are in your cycle on a given day, that can help you understand why maybe at training that day you felt really awful and like you're like, why can't I do anything? Well, maybe like your energy is just really low and you're thinking, oh, I should be performing the same every time I go to the gym. You know, I know we talk a lot on the podcast about like your muscles need to like rest and recover, but for women there is, and for guys too, like hormones are changing not the same way, but you know, for
Yeah.
women there is this fluctuation that's happening throughout our cycles that if we're aware of, we can take advantage of those optimal performance days and the days that really our body needs more rest. We'll be more aware of it and realize it's not just us like sucking that day. It's like, oh no, there's actually something like real going on inside my body that I could be aware of and could be realizing when I need to rest.
Yeah. And actually, you bring up a really good point too, is that when you're training and, you know, you're assessing how the day went or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
instead of comparing it to the day before, or, you know, how you felt, you actually, if you take each phase and you know, like, this is my optimal in my follicular phase, this is my optimal in my luteal phase, then you're, once you get into the rhythm of, okay, I know where I'm at, then you can assess your training based on where you are in your cycle. You know, it's not just actually like, okay, I want to train during, or I want to compete during this time, but it's also like we have to compare ourselves to how we are at the same time every month, instead of just last week I felt better. Like, yeah, because you were ovulating. Like that happens, you know? So just being aware of that, it actually helps you to assess your training a lot better, because you know how your body was the last time you trained in this phase.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's something I never would have really thought about, so I love
Yeah.
it. Yay.
Yeah, good.
Let's learn more.
So, so I think too, it's really important to remember that, you know, a great athlete doesn't have to, a great female athlete doesn't have to look like a great male athlete, you know, and we don't have to become more like men just to be good at what we do, you know.
Mhm.
There's a really, I think, damaging and harmful um, rhetoric out there from some doctors that are saying like, actually we don't need periods, just get on the pill and like forget about your period, and you know the best thing we can do is just eliminate it completely for every woman. And I take offense to that personally. I think that that's completely wrong. I think it's not honoring who we are. But I also think it's actually like we lose the advantage that we have. We're going to talk about it, but we actually have an advantage over men. A lot of times, you know, especially as athletes, like it's easy to think like, oh, well, you know, they can build muscle in different ways and whatever. And it's easy to see like, oh, you know, the disadvantage that we have. But using this, it really, you lose that advantage by eliminating your period, by being on hormonal birth control. You actually lose something that's integral to your body and an advantage to being an athlete, being a woman, being you know, it's just so you kind of are not taking all that you can get out of life, really, I think.
Yeah, that's so
um
interesting.
yeah, and the reason I say that is because we're talking about periods, but just as sort of a disclaimer,
Right.
periods that happen when you're on the birth control, when you're on hormonal birth control, are not actually periods at all. They're what is called a withdrawal bleed, which is really just the endometrial lining shedding. But because hormonal birth control stops ovulation, it means that it's not a real period. And like no judgment whatsoever, like no judgment whatsoever for people who need to be on hormonal birth control. It's everyone's decision.
Right.
I would say if it's an option, then definitely look into the non-hormonal possibilities, because usually women will be on the hormonal birth control pill for two reasons. One is like a hormonal imbalance, a medical condition that's usually has an underlying hormonal imbalance. And unfortunately the pill is usually just masking the symptoms. It's not actually dealing with the underlying issues. That's a lot of what I do with my clients, is just talk about where this started and how to sort of deal with the lifestyle choices. And that's why I'm so passionate about, you know, lifestyle and just changing, because I think that the intervention that is the easiest should always be the first, you know. Fix your lifestyle, fix your diet, fix all that, and then if it's equally as bad as it was when you before you made all those changes, which I personally have never seen in any of my clients, if it's equally bad, then okay, we can talk about medication. But medication should never, in my opinion, I never will say don't take medication, but it shouldn't be the first line of, you know, defense or whatever. It should really be way after we've tried all the easier options, natural options. Then if nothing changes and you're really just in a lot of pain, you know, there's no judgment whatsoever.
Yeah, and it does seem like very often from stories I've heard from my own friends and things that, you know, when they were teen, they were just given birth control, and there wasn't like a, it's like, oh, you have cramps during your periods, well, here's some birth control, like it'll even your
Yeah.
period out. Like that's the
Yeah.
rhetoric I've heard, is like,
Yeah.
oh, it helps regulate your period. But
Mm-hmm.
like that's not at all really, when you really
No,
deeply look into it, like it's not what's happening.
no, it's not at all, because the birth can like it's all of the hormones in a birth control pill are synthetic, and so everything is not naturally produced in your body. And regulating your period is actually having the perfect hormone dance, which we're going to talk about. But your body is the best regulator of your period, essentially, and the way that we live allows that to be regulated properly.
Yeah.
So you're never going to have regulation with synthetic hormones.
Got it.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah, and again,
yeah.
I know you just said this, but again, for anyone who's listening, they're like, "Well, I'm on that, and what?" Like, it's like I think there's ways that you can research more on your own to know, like,
Yeah.
truly, are you doing the best thing for your body? But today, we really just want to talk about how people understand the overview of why we're talking about this, and like how
Yeah.
it relates to if you are on synthetic birth control or if you're not. But to get really to like our main focus of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what is going on in the body, and as athletes, how can we take advantage of it? So
Exactly. Yes. So look into it. So let's talk about what is a healthy cycle. Okay. So a healthy cycle technically has, I mean, we like to define it as 4 stages. Um, so the first stage is the obvious one. Day 1 of your bleeding is the first day of your cycle. That's how it's tracked from day 1 to day 1 is a full cycle. So the first day of bleeding is the menstrual stage, and that's when, I mean, obviously the endometrial lining is shedding, you're losing blood, and there's a healthy sort of range. Usually it's going to be between 2 and 7 days. Um, I was blessed to have a shorter one. I'm so grateful. But you can be, bleeding for five. I think the average is 5 to 6 days.
yeah,
Um,
I'm usually shorter too.
yeah, it's sweet. um, so the important thing to know about this stage is that having moderate cramps, like reasonable cramps for 1-2 days, is fine. Like that's normal. And having like moderate bleeding is normal. If you have,
Right.
yeah,
I was gonna
go
say, but
ahead.
are you talking about those cramps where you're like keeled over, like, oh, I need to be in bed, or like that's it, give me
That
mitral
is
now?
not my definition of
Okay.
moderate. If it's someone who's listening, like please get it checked. No. Um Extreme cramps and excessive bleeding is an indication that there is some kind of hormonal imbalance. And the thing is that today we're talking about general, this is what, this phase is going to look like. But with every woman, it's completely individual.
Mhm.
And force it, like we have short periods, for someone else 5 days is completely normal. And if she's balanced, it's totally fine. It's not gonna hinder anything that she's doing. So every woman is different, and so
Mhm.
it's important to know what your normal is and what your healthy is, and go with that. And that's, obviously when I work with my clients and we diagnose little different pieces of the phases, then that's more of an individualized thing. But we're
Right.
just talking about in general. So this is when basically you're going to have your lowest energy, because the main hormones in this cycle are estrogen and progesterone, and these are at their lowest on day 1 and during your period. They basically they kind of go through fluctuations, and then they just sort of drop at the beginning when you start bleeding. And so you're going to have really low energy. This is a time to rest and renew and, sleep a little bit extra if you can. If it's possible not to book a competition on this day. Once you
Mhm.
start tracking your cycle, you should know around when your period should be coming. It really shouldn't be a surprise. Um, so if you can not book competitions on these days, that would be best. But if people feel that they don't need to be in bed, and yes, it hurts, but it's not impossible, it doesn't mean you can't train on that day, but
Mhm.
really non-intensive training is best. And that's mainly because your body at that point is um, it's essentially shifting from, we'll talk about at the very during PMS, but it's shifting from an extreme stress response to like it's coming all the way down. And so you just need to
Okay.
give it a chance to sort of come down so you don't push it back into stress, and then that just throws off your entire cycle.
Interesting.
So you want to just rebalance, you want to do minimal training, and you just want to eat, foods that give you energy. Healthy fats is good. Like that'll just kind of boost your energy if you need to do something. And of course, during this phase, most of us get cramps. That's fine. So usually from a clean diet, you can sort of resolve the most extreme symptoms.
Mhm.
And by clean, everyone's diet is going to look different, and the optimal diet for each woman, I think, is different. But there's some basic principles, and I think usually most of the people listening, like they know, like don't eat sugar, don't eat processed food, like simple carbs, like, you can figure that out with training. But especially during the bleeding phase, you get a lot of cravings. As you know, I don't need to tell you, but yeah, like there's a chemical there's a hormonal reason why we get cravings, but we do. And so instead of just like going for the sugar, if you have like sort of that clean, balanced diet, then that's really good. But there are a few sort of like extra things that you can do to get rid of cramps that are still bothering you. So actually, one of my clients, we went through like all of this, like cleaning out her diet, and she had, we were kind of transitioning her off the pill in this process. And then she just was still getting really, really bad cramps. And she went back to her doctor, and doctor's like, "Oh, I can put you on the pill." Like, oh, no, like I'm good for the rest of the month. I don't need like to be on hormones just for like 2 days. So I gave her this tea that I make. It's like a mixture of some herbs and stuff that helps like with the cramping. And like it took about 2 months, and she's like, "What is this?" Like it's awesome. So we'll like link in the show notes that
she had to drink like every day, and that's why for 2 months it had to like build up, and that's why she didn't
yeah.
really...
So basically, the reason is that it takes the follicle 100 days to mature. We're going to talk about that in the next phase.
Okay.
But sometimes when you're talking about your cycle, you don't see results right away because there's all these things that still need to work out in your body to see the effects of what you've done. So the first month it was like a little better. The second month it was much better, and then it sort of just balanced out from there. So, but you actually have to take this specific tea. You have to drink 10, like starting 10 days before your period, which is why you need to know when your period's coming. And you drink like every day until your period, and then you stop, which is like a little strange, but it works like really well. So,
yeah, we'll
and then
definitely have to link to that. And we can share more about it.
Yeah. So, and the other thing is easy to remember. It's called cramp bark. And it's like actually a flower that like the flower is poisonous, but the bark is really good for like muscle cramps and stuff. Yeah.
Don't go eat the flower, but
no, like the extract is, the extract is always made from the bark, but don't go like foraging in the forest like for this flower and like peel off the bark. Don't do that. So that actually you could take during your period, and it's really, really good for just relieving cramps. And then there's some, like, because we're bleeding, obviously we're losing, minerals in the bleed. So there are minerals that you can take, like iron, obviously is a good one. Zinc is really good for it. They've found in a lot of studies that zinc is really good for cramps, and magnesium as well. But I would say for a healthy period, you can pretty much take zinc and magnesium all the time, and that just like really just balances things out. So that's that's, I would say, the best combination of how to deal with some bad cramps. So then
that's good to know.
After after the period is done, you are into your follicular phase. So technically day 1 of your period is the whole thing is your follicular phase, but obviously menstrual is different from the rest. So as after your endometrial lining is shed, it's called the follicular phase because there's a follicle that basically is they all sort of are at different stages, and then there's one that's like the dominant one, and it sort of like is maturing at that point. And so this follicle is eventually what releases the egg for ovulation. But this follicle also produces really awesome hormones. Especially so in this phase of the cycle, your estrogen, it's called estrogen rising. And so your estrogen is basically like building up through the follicular phase up until ovulation. And estrogen is like, it makes us feel awesome. It boosts like serotonin and dopamine, and just like it boosts our mood. And if you think about it too, like once you're done your period, you feel like lighter and just like this is great. It's not just because you finished bleeding, it's also because your body is just creating all these hormones to just like pick you up a bit. And so you have the most energy on these days, and this is also when like testosterone, towards the end of this phase, testosterone rises. And so then you can build muscle. This is for athletes like the prime time. Okay, so this is like intense training. This is when your body is in the least stress response, so it's the most in the parasympathetic mode, and it just like it's ready to heal consistently and immediately, basically. So this is like train as intensely as possible pretty much at this point. And this is just basically building up into ovulation. So this phase is going to be, again, it's going to be different for every woman. This one actually has the most difference. The luteal phase is closer, but this one can be anywhere from like 7 days to like 25 days. So 25 days is a bit much. You don't want a period that's longer than 32 days, but anyways, yeah. So this is really like your optimal phase, and there isn't really much. I personally don't really subscribe to like the eat certain foods at certain times. Just eat well and eat for your body, and test and see what works for you, basically, right?
Yeah.
So this is like your sweet spot, basically, and it builds up to ovulation, which is the peak really of the cycle. And this is when the egg drops, and this is so right before, like basically the day right before ovulation. Now obviously it's not like that exact of a science, you can't, like most women can't say like, oh, I just ovulated, like some can, like there's there's like a mild pain, and usually you can feel it on one side, and that's usually the side that the egg is dropping from. So if you do have mild pain on your day of ovulation, that's a good way to know. There's obviously other ways, but we can't really talk about the specific tracking methods and all that today.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot to talk
about.
Not that we can't.
Yeah. So once you get into ovulation, pretty much like estrogen has sort of peaked the day before ovulation, so it's starting to come down, and you're experiencing, you're kind of, I mean, because it's a cycle, right? So it's not like this day is like this day and then it's completely different from the follicular phase, and it's completely, it's like it flows into it, so your kind of ovulation is the marker between the follicular phase and the luteal phase. So you peak, and then it just kind of, estrogen starts to creep down again. And so go ahead.
I was gonna say, before we move on to that, the second half, so really then that first half, as estrogen is rising, right?
Yeah.
That's also when testosterone is rising a bit for women. And so that's why training is more optimal at that point.
Estrogen, the reason that training is optimal is because estrogen gives us a lot of energy. Your body it's come out of the stress mode, and it's building up to its optimal parasympathetic state. And because testosterone, it's rising a bit, but essentially peaks during ovulation.
So that's when we want to compete, if we could schedule, you know what I mean? Sometimes your region, ninjas know this, has like a lot of competitions, and you can really look at the calendar. Sometimes you can't, but I guess if you can, it's like book it during that time.
Yes, book it during your ovulation window, essentially, because your window is like day of ovulation minus 5 days, like 5 days prior is that window. So it's your kind of your best hormone dance. So yes, definitely book your competitions during that time, because you will have an advantage over other women who don't do this, and
That's cool.
potentially definitely men who don't ovulate. Like, ovulation is the best. It's really the best. I don't like it really sucks that men don't ever experience that, but
Yeah.
anyways.
Yeah,
um
for myself, I have been tracking and like charting my cycles for about a year now. And
mhm,
so I've begun to like notice these trends that you're talking about and be able to
yeah.
like compare month to month. So I definitely notice during that fertile window getting close to ovulation that I do feel a lot better and I do feel more
Mhm.
like let's go, like ready for stuff. So I haven't yet tested it as much in competition because partially because of Corona, but
Yeah.
I was at the CrossFit gym last cycle during that time, and I remember doing like so good at this workout, and it was one of those workouts where it was like AMRAP, and we did multiple AMRAPs, and so it was like try to beat your score or like match your score from the one before,
Yeah.
and I was doing it, and I was like doing like just matching it perfectly or doing a little bit better each time, and I was like, wow, I
Mhm.
feel like a superhuman. And then we had this conversation a few days later, and I was like, wait, I was ovulating. So
Yes.
yay, I saw it happen.
Yeah, it's awesome. Once you
Yeah.
once you learn, because it gives, the funny thing is with guys, it's like you can have a good day and you can have a bad day and you don't really know why, and it's just,
Yeah.
out there somewhere. But for us, like, once you start tracking it, it's like, I know when my
Yeah.
good day is going to be, so I'm just going to have an awesome day. And then it's really not so, like, the next phase is really not so bad. We'll talk about it. It's
Yeah.
not like you go from like awesome to,
Right.
like
Yeah.
like nothing, right? So it's just, that's the thing. It's always
The
just
boost.
like
Yeah.
gentle. Yeah, it's a dance. It's a dance,
Yeah.
the hormone dance. um yeah, so that's ovulation. It's usually going to be around like 15 days or so before the next period. And that's just, we like to use those numbers just to kind of have a sense of like, this is what's average, but know yourself and know your own cycle and just
Hmm.
make sure that it's, healthy. And so then we get into what's called the luteal phase. So the luteal phase is actually, it has like, the beginning is very much like you're still kind of coming out of a little bit of the follicular phase, and so it's not, you don't like, you know your hormones don't deplete that quickly. Basically what happens is that at the time of ovulation, both estrogen comes down, and then once the egg is released, it turns into what's called the corpus luteum, which is why it's called the luteal phase. And this corpus luteum produces progesterone. And this is the only way that our bodies can produce progesterone. So it's very important. And that's why ovulation is very important and awesome. And so your estrogen actually also starts rising again. So it kind of like, it peaks and then it comes down and then it comes up, but not at the level it was in the follicular phase. It kind of like halfway. And so progesterone and estrogen are being produced by this corpus luteum. And so you're still in a good space and you still have decent energy, but it's not like the follicular phase. So you can still be training, and I wouldn't train intensely on every day of this phase, but because testosterone is out of the picture now. Once ovulation happened, you don't get it until next time, or like you don't get the peak, so you can't build muscle in the same way. Go
Okay,
ahead.
but that's not to say you like all your muscles are gonna like melt off your body.
No,
Like
no. Like, we still have testosterone,
right.
we don't
Okay.
have as much, but it's not like your optimal muscle building phase. You want to do
Got it.
like more maintenance, and there's so many different types of workouts, and types of training
Right.
that we can do. So it's just knowing like what's the optimal. So this is still like, you can
Yeah.
train, but not super intensely, because your body is starting, like, with the development of the corpus luteum, your body is starting to get into that sympathetic mode.
Got
It's
it.
starting to get into stress mode, and obviously that peaks like during PMS. So the luteal phase is this sort of transitioning out, and your progesterone is like your kind of, progesterone and estrogen allows you to transition into what's the PMS and the menstrual phase.
Yeah.
um but you are still kind of riding the like ovulation wave. um, so yeah, so you can still train obviously, but don't go as crazy as your ovulation. And this is going to be, there are some a little bit of like strange symptoms for some women. Like sometimes you can get like super like digestion kind of goes off a bit, like with the increase in progesterone and stuff. And but here's a fun fact, is that the peak of estrogen, or the peak of progesterone, happens like a week after ovulation. And that's actually like, a lot of progesterone is really good for sleep.
Mm.
And so that's why you can kind of like, you sleep really well, but then progesterone starts coming down and then you're like getting into PMS. So enjoy the enjoy the sleep days like before PMS, because once your progesterone starts coming down, that's when all the biological markers that are responsible for stress, like HRV and your resting heart rate and your temperature and your respiratory rate, they all switch into essentially sympathetic and into the stress response. And it's not like you are stressed, but
Mm.
it just, your body is. Even if you don't feel, even if there aren't, circumstances that are stressful, your body
Mm.
is stressed out. So that's why towards the end of the luteal phase, like right before your period, is is the worst time really to train intensely,
Mm-hmm.
because even if you don't feel it, your body's already stressed out. So if you do an intense workout, it's going to push it more into stress mode, and then it can't really recover the way that it needs to, because it just
Interesting.
can't catch up to the amount of stress that you've put on it. So it's better towards the end of the luteal phase, which is usually around PMS. So that's sometimes when cramps start happening, anyways.
Mm-hmm.
It's better to sort of wind down and definitely not do intense. And definitely, if you can, please don't schedule competitions during this time as well,
Yeah.
because you're gonna lose the advantage, and you're just gonna lose the, you won't be able to compete as best as you can, and they've done
Mm.
even studies about like women who have like run marathons, and some of them have a specific response by the end of the marathon that are in their luteal phase versus follicular phase. It's pretty crazy to read some of these studies. So
That's so interesting.
yeah. So PMS basically is the last few days of the luteal phase, and that's like when you're pretty much everything is dropping. Estrogen is dropping, progesterone is dropping, and because of that, serotonin is dropping, and you have all these like crazy cravings, and you just want to eat sugar. And definitely don't eat too much sugar, because it's just a bad cycle. I mean, we all know, right? Like if you give in to these cravings, and it gets you back into the cycle of craving, and like getting, an imbalance in your blood sugar, which is going to cause worse cramps. And
Mm.
so try as much as possible to like just have balanced meals during that time, and
Mm-hmm.
keep the blood sugar balanced, so that you don't have to give in to those crazy cravings. But I find, like, personally, I find that once I know that I'm in that phase and I know that it's coming, I can sort of like, okay, I know this is not me. It's there. So let me just like make sure that I can manage this well, so that it doesn't get the best of me, you know?
Yeah, if you're more aware of what's going on, it's easier to make better decisions because you
Yeah.
realize what's happening. You're not just like you're not just reacting to what you're
Yeah.
feeling. You're like responding preemptively.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's like taking preventative measures for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also really important when you're talking about female athletes to talk about missing periods.
Oh, definitely.
Um, yeah, because it's really common, obviously. So I think it's especially common with extreme athletics.
Mm-hmm.
And I think mainly the research will say that it is from two main things. One is energy availability, basically, like so essentially, if you're not taking in enough calories and you're just working out a lot, and there just isn't enough, then that is one of the reasons that will put enough stress on your body to stop ovulating and stop having a period.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the key to that is just eat enough, really, like, don't like, just manage your sort of your calorie intake. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is, actually, we kind of mentioned, that is a little bit of the the stress, like working out when you're stressed out. So
Okay.
one of the reasons that you miss your period is because there's too much stress on your body. And if you work out in those times when your body is in stress mode, like PMS and like your period, then it can cause too much stress in your body, and then it will cause missed periods.
And
So yeah.
and do you think that that's not so much necessarily like, oh, I'm supposed to get my period tomorrow, but I worked out really hard today. Oh, I think I'm gonna miss it now. It's more so like a build up of if it's a
Mhm.
constant pattern in your life, building up over the months previous, like it could cause you to miss it or lose it in that sense.
Yeah, it's not going to be from one day. It's really from a systematic sort of like
Got it.
excessively pushing your body. It's going to your body just isn't is going to have none of it.
Like,
Like
excuse me.
nope.
Yeah.
Nope. So and that's what I talked about. That's why I mentioned in the beginning, like it's just giving you feedback for what you're doing.
Right.
So like if you find that something is going off with your period when you've changed something about your working out, or if you haven't really had consistent periods, like that is something that your body is telling you, like, yeah, exercising and doing all of this is great, but you still need to have a healthy cycle in order to be healthy.
Right.
And Bill, we talked about how great ovulation is, but essentially, if you're not having your period, then you're not ovulating. And it's not just, this is important to remember, is that it's not just, yeah, I want to ovulate every month because it's awesome, but
Mm.
also this hormone dance that we're talking about, the estrogen coming up and down and up and down, is the way that your body keeps your hormones in balance. You need progesterone, and you can only create it if you are ovulating. If you don't ovulate and you
Mm.
don't have progesterone, you will just have way too much estrogen in your body, and that causes a lot of hormonal imbalance. A lot of
Mm.
medical conditions come from estrogen excess.
Right. So it's
So, yeah.
yeah, so I think sometimes I hear this too is like, oh, well, I'm not trying to get pregnant, so who cares if I don't have my period?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's I get why people would say that, but I think it's just that misconception of, yeah, but there's so much else that's happening if you're not ovulating or not getting your period that, like you just mentioned, that it doesn't have anything to do with like, are you fit to have a baby or not? It's like, what else is going on that you don't know that's getting out of whack inside of your body?
Yeah, exactly. And like you mentioned too, these things build up.
Mm.
So if you are not ovulating, it's not just that your hormones are not in balance right now, but also like when you get into perimenopause and menopause, like if your hormones are not balanced, it's going to be so much worse. And menopause in like a hormonally balanced body is actually okay. It's not as bad as we've been, told, or what what they say about menopause.
Yeah, when I was growing up, whenever I would hear about it, I would just think like these like clouds of like hot cloud flashes were just gonna like come upon me. Like that's just like what I imagined. Hot
Like
flash.
flashes of heat.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, it's really like, I mean, obviously I have not experienced it myself yet, but certainly when you are balanced, then your body is just, it continues. And so you transition into the next phase a lot easier.
Mhm.
And with like a balanced cycle, or with balanced hormones, and with a healthy cycle, then if you do eventually want to get pregnant, then it's much easier to do that. And the
Right.
pregnancy is healthier because your body is healthier. So it's all about just caring, for yourself.
Yay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. It's cool to
Yeah.
really learn all about this and understand it a bit better because it helps. I think it helps me. It helps women and girls in general, like realize why we can appreciate what's going on and just value our bodies more and like value this amazing system that we have that's like working for us every single month, every cycle. So it's cool.
Yeah. 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 For sure.
Yes. So I
Yeah.
know we covered a lot today, but there's still like so much more. If
Yeah.
people really have questions and are wondering, maybe they've encountered struggles or they really want to understand how to optimize what's going on in their body during their cycles, how could they possibly even book with you to work with like a one-on-one? Like, tell us more about what you do in your one-on-ones.
Sure. So usually I'll usually we'll meet, and I'll just get a sense of where they're at. And specifically, I like to address the food, what food they're eating, the sleep, and the exercise and stress management. So I just kind of get a sense of where they're at, and then we go through and talk about each of the different what needs to be corrected. My approach is very much about establishing habits in life. I don't like to make changes, like a lot of changes at once, because it's
Mhm.
just not sustainable, and I really want to encourage people to live a healthy lifestyle that will last forever. And so, like, doing it through sort of the umbrella of habits,
Mhm.
that is what I focus on. So I actually have a habits course as well, and I think we'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, so it's understanding how to establish, how to live your life with these specific habits in place, and it's really about caring for your body. And so for every person, obviously, I work differently with each
Sure.
person based on how they're responding and how they actually start these habits. But that really is my approach, is just to change small things over time, and consistency builds these changes in life, and it sustains them, really. And that's what I found in my own life, and I've seen that in a lot of people's, and it makes me excited to just see people's lives change for the better.
I love that. Yes. Awesome.
Yay.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And we'll definitely link in the show notes if people want to learn more about booking with you one on one or learn more about those online courses. It's awesome.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Do you have any last words before we close out?
Periods are awesome.
Period.
Whoa.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you
Okay.
again so much for everything that you shared. It's been awesome having you on the podcast.
Of course. Be strong, be you, be a ninja babe.
Yeah.
Yeah.